Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep today into something we all struggle with, mastering your attention in a world that seems to be overflowing with distractions.
Oh, yeah.
Our phones, they're always buzzing, social media is always beckoning, and our minds, well, they're often just a whirlwind of thoughts.
It really is amazing how our attention, which is so crucial for, well, a good life, can be so easily hijacked.
Right, like trying to have a conversation while a marching band's parading right through the room.
Mm,
So how can we reclaim that control? How can we cultivate that state of hyperfocus? That's what we are going to be looking at today.
that's our mission.
Yeah. And we've got some fascinating research to guide us, some personal anecdotes, even a few, I think, surprising statistics to share with you guys. We're going to be exploring the limits of our attention, uncovering those sneaky autopilot habits that we all have, and ultimately discovering, hopefully, how to overcome those distractions.
And, one of the first things that our source material points out is the surprising power of this autopilot mode. Just how we sort of go through a lot of our day without really making conscious decisions.
Oh, I can totally relate to that. Like, how many times have you driven home from work and then you suddenly realize, wait a minute, I don't even remember the drive.
Right.
It's like our brains just go on this total cruise control.
Exactly. Yeah. And the source actually puts a number on this, a pretty staggering one, 40%. A full 40% of our actions are driven by habits operating on that autopilot.
Wow.
It's efficient, I mean, for routine tasks, sure, but when it comes to our attention, well, that's where it can become a real problem. Instead of consciously choosing where we're putting our focus, we're just letting all this external stimuli kind of dictate where our attention goes.
So we're basically handing over the reins of our attention to whatever's the loudest or most insistent in that moment.
Precisely, yeah. Like, the source gives this great example. Imagine you're in a taxi, the radio's playing an interview with, I don't know, some author, right?
Right.
And you're kind of half listening, but then you see, like, a friend tweet about that same book, and all of a sudden you're on Amazon ordering a copy.
Oh, I've totally done that. I've totally done that. Wow. That's a perfect example of autopilot, like in action.
Right. It highlights how we often just react to the stimuli rather than making deliberate choices about where our attention goes. But here's the catch. Even when we are trying to be intentional, our attentional capacity, it's actually incredibly limited.
Yeah, let's get into that because I remember this one mind-blowing concept from the source material, this thing called attentional space.
Yes.
And it's basically our mental capacity to process information just at any given moment. And get this, the research suggests that out of the millions of bits of information that our brains are receiving every single second, we can only consciously process around 40.
40. It's a strikingly small number when you really think about it. And even just a simple conversation, it can already eat up a huge chunk of those precious attentional bits.
So, if just having a conversation takes up that much mental bandwidth, imagine what happens when we try to multitask with more complex things.
Oh, absolutely. We're spreading ourselves so thin that our attention becomes pretty ineffective. And that leads us to another fascinating limitation that the source highlights, the capacity of our short-term memory. The research there suggests we can only hold about 4 chunks of unique information in our minds at any one time.
Yeah, I remember this. This name memorization challenge. Arden, Rick, Ryan, Lucinda, Louise, Martin, Kelsey, Sinisa, Dwight, and Bryce. Do you remember those? Try to remember them all right now. Most people, they can only recall a handful.
Right. It illustrates the limits.
Yeah.
But the source also offers us a potential solution: chunking. By grouping information into smaller, more manageable units, we can actually increase our recall. Like phone numbers, think about it.
Oh, yeah, they're chunked, right?
3 or 4 digits, make them easier to remember.
That's so true. And we see this in pop culture too, right?
Yeah.
All those famous duos like Batman and Robin,
Oh, yeah.
Thelma and Louise, our brains, they just seem to really prefer these smaller, more manageable bits of information.
It's an interesting way to think about how our minds work. And it really highlights why bombarding ourselves with information, especially when we try to multitask, can be so counterproductive.
So what can we do about it? I mean, how do we even become more aware of what's actually taking up space in our attentional bandwidth in the first place?
Well, the source introduces this idea of, what's it called? Meta-awareness. It's about becoming conscious of what's actually occupying our mental space at any given moment. And here's a pretty sobering statistic studies show our minds wander almost half the time.
Wow, that's a lot of time spent not really being present. I know, I'm definitely guilty of that.
But here's the good news. Simply being aware of that mind wandering can actually make us more focused. There's research that shows people who are more conscious of their mind wandering are better at solving problems and completing tasks.
That's really interesting. So just noticing when our minds drift off can help us get back on track more quickly.
Exactly. And it can also help us realize that, not every thought deserves our full attention. Sometimes our minds just generate all these worries and anxieties that we really don't need to dwell on.
That's a great point. It's like learning to filter out the mental noise and focus on what truly matters.
So we've seen just how limited our attention really is and how easily it can get hijacked by all these distractions, both internal and external. But the source material doesn't just leave us hanging there, thankfully. It actually dives into strategies for how we can take back control.
Yeah, that's what I'm excited to get into because, knowing is one thing, but actually putting it into practice, that's where the real magic happens, right?
Oh, absolutely. And the source really emphasizes this idea of intentionality as like a key starting point.
Oh,
It sounds simple enough, but consciously deciding what we actually want to accomplish, what we want to focus on, can make a huge difference.
it makes sense, right? And if you don't have a clear intention, you're just reacting to whatever comes at you, like a ship without a rudder, just getting tossed around by the waves.
That's such a great analogy. And the source also talks about shaping our environment in a way that supports our intentions, minimizing those distractions that are constantly vying for our attention.
So things like, I don't know, turning off notifications, finding a quiet workspace, maybe even like putting your phone in another room.
Exactly,
Yeah,
yeah. Creating an environment where our attention can actually thrive, a space that's conducive to focus and deep work.
I love that. A focus sanctuary where our best thinking can really emerge. But what about those internal distractions?
Right.
The worries and anxieties that just, they pop up even when we've silenced all the external noise.
Yeah, the source addresses that too. It suggests acknowledging those thoughts, but not getting too caught up in them, realizing that, not all thoughts are worthy of our attention. It's kind of a practice in mindfulness, right?
Yeah.
Just observing our mental chatter without getting swept away.
So it's like almost being a curious observer of our own minds rather than getting like entangled in every single thought that arises.
Precisely, yeah. And once we've sort of minimized those distractions, both external and internal, then the source tackles another hurdle, and that's mental resistance.
Oh, yeah.
We all have those tasks that we know we should be doing, but we just can't seem to find the motivation for.
Oh, absolutely. For me, it's writing. I know it's important for my work, but sometimes I'd rather do just about anything else like reorganize my sock drawer.
The source sheds some light on why this happens. It connects it to our brain's novelty bias. We're just wired to seek out new and stimulating experiences, and our brains actually reward us with a hit of dopamine when we do.
So even though checking social media, for example, might be totally unproductive, our brain still gives us that little pat on the back because we found something novel, right?
Exactly. It's really a leftover from our evolutionary past
Yeah.
when novelty seeking was essential for survival, right?
Right.
But in today's world, it often leads us down this rabbit hole of distractions.
So how do we break free from this novelty bias and tackle those essential tasks, even if they don't offer that kind of instant gratification?
Well, the source recommends taking proactive steps to eliminate those distractions before they even arise.
Okay.
So this might involve setting really designated work hours, using, website blockers, or even letting our colleagues know, hey, I'm unavailable for this specific period of time.
It's like building a fortress around your focus so you're not constantly fending off these distractions.
Yes, exactly. And it can be helpful to also address those internal distractions before we dive into deep work.
Okay.
So jotting down worries in a notebook,
Mhm.
meditating, taking a walk, these can all help clear our minds and create that space for focus.
It's like taking out the mental trash before starting a new project, making room for fresh ideas and insights.
Now remember those 4 task categories we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Necessary work, unnecessary work, distracting work, and purposeful work. The source encourages us to actually apply this framework to our own lives.
Right. It's like doing a mental inventory to identify which tasks really deserve our attention.
Exactly. And this awareness allows us to really prioritize those most valuable tasks, the ones that actually align with our goals and bring us closer to the life that we want to create.
Okay, so we've cleared the distractions, we're mindful of our thoughts, and we've prioritized those most important tasks. Now, how do we actually get into that coveted state of hyperfocus?
Well, the source material gives us a few practical strategies.
Okay, good.
First, it really reiterates the importance of setting clear intentions. So, write down what you want to achieve during your work session. This really solidifies your commitment and helps you stay on track.
It's like having a roadmap for your attention, guiding you towards that desired destination.
Then there's the environment, which we already discussed. But beyond just eliminating distractions, the source also emphasizes the value of creating a workspace that feels inspiring and conducive to focus.
So like surrounding yourself with things that spark your creativity and motivation.
Precisely. Think about what elements actually help you get into that flow state: natural light, calming music, a comfortable chair. These small details can actually make a big difference.
Yeah, I find that even just having a dedicated workspace, even if it's just like a corner of my kitchen table, it really helps me to mentally shift into work mode.
Absolutely. Another helpful strategy is using a timer. So set it for, a specific work period and then just commit to staying focused for that duration. It helps create a sense of urgency and minimizes the temptation to get sidetracked.
It's like giving yourself that mini deadline, which can be surprisingly motivating.
And don't forget the importance of breaks.
Oh yes, breaks are important.
They're crucial for preventing mental fatigue and maintaining focus over those longer periods. The source suggests taking like a 5 to 10 minute break for every 25 to 30 minutes of focused work.
That makes sense, yeah. It's like giving your brain a chance to kind of recharge and come back to the task, refreshed and ready to go.
Now, here's a powerful tip that often gets overlooked. Reward yourself. Celebrating our accomplishments, even the small ones, can actually help reinforce those positive habits and make the work feel less like a chore.
I love that. It's like giving yourself a little pat on the back for a job well done. And who doesn't love a little celebration, right?
Exactly. And the source emphasizes that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to hyperfocus. It's really about finding what works best for you. So experiment with these strategies, tweak them to fit your own work style, and see what helps you achieve that state of deep focus.
It's like creating a personalized recipe for productivity, finding that perfect blend of ingredients that help us do our best work.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that hyperfocus is a skill that takes practice. We're not aiming for some mythical state of perfect concentration, but rather gradually improving our ability to direct and sustain our attention.
So it's a journey, not a destination. And with consistent effort, we can all become masters of our attention, even in this incredibly distracting world.
And the source offers 3 metrics to help us kind of track our progress along the way.
Oh, I'm curious to hear about those. What are they?
Well, first, there's how much time we spend intentionally each day. It's about actively choosing what we focus on, rather than just reacting to whatever pops up.
So it's about being the CEO of our attention, making conscious decisions about how we spend our most valuable resource.
Then there's how long we can sustain our focus on a single task before our minds start to wander.
This is where those timer strategies can come in handy, right? It's like training our attention muscles to stay engaged for longer periods.
Exactly. Yeah. And lastly, there's how quickly we can catch ourselves when our minds do wander and redirect our attention back to the task at hand.
So it's about becoming more mindful of our mental habits and developing that ability to kind of gently guide our attention back to where it needs to be. So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, exploring the limits of our attention, that sneaky power of autopilot, and all those pesky distractions that just seem to constantly vie for our mental energy.
Yeah, we really have. And we've also explored some practical strategies, thankfully, for how we can take back control, from setting clear intentions to shaping our environments, even rewiring our brains to overcome that novelty bias.
So let's bring it all together. What are the key takeaways here? I mean, what does all this really mean for us as we're navigating these daily demands of our modern world?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that, our attention is really a finite resource. It's not an endless well. And just like, we wouldn't squander our time or money, we need to be really mindful of how we're spending our attention.
It's like we have this mental budget, and we need to be intentional about where we're investing those attentional dollars. Every time we get sucked into a distraction, it's like making an impulse purchase that leaves us kind of feeling depleted and unfulfilled.
Oh, I love that analogy. That's perfect. And those small distractions, they really do add up over time, leaving us feeling, scattered, overwhelmed, and ultimately less effective in all areas of our lives.
So the first step is really recognizing that we have a choice in each moment. We can either passively react to whatever's grabbing our attention or, consciously choose what we focus on.
Right. And that actually leads to the second big takeaway, I think, which is the importance of creating an environment that supports that intentionality. So this means minimizing those external distractions,
Yeah.
silencing those notifications, finding a dedicated workspace, maybe even, putting our phones in another room.
And it's not just about silencing the external noise,
Or,
right?
yeah.
We also have to learn how to manage those internal distractions, those worries, anxieties that can kind of hijack our attention, even in the quietest of spaces.
Absolutely. It's about developing that mindfulness muscle, learning to observe our thoughts without getting totally swept away by them.
The third takeaway, I think, for me at least, is that hyperfocus isn't this, magical state of perfect concentration that we either have or we don't have. It's a skill that we can cultivate, through practice and discipline.
And the source material, thankfully, gives us a whole toolkit of strategies to help us do just that. Remember, um, those tips about setting clear intentions, using a timer, taking regular breaks, even rewarding ourselves for our accomplishments.
Yeah, those are all so helpful. It's like we're building this personalized productivity system, finding
Yeah.
the perfect blend of techniques that helps us do our best work.
And finally, I think it's important to remember that we're not aiming for perfection here. We're all human and our minds are going to wander. The key is to notice when it happens and gently guide our attention back to where it needs to be.
So it's about progress, not perfection. And with consistent effort, we can all become more adept at managing our attention, even in this, incredibly distracting world. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious, what's one small change you're going to make today to be more intentional with your attention? Will you silence those distracting notifications, create a dedicated workspace, or maybe take a few minutes to just clear your mind before diving into your next task? The choice is yours. But remember, by understanding the limits of our attention and taking control, we can achieve greater productivity and a more fulfilling life. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, stay focused and keep exploring.